We're very thrilled to have with us today 5 photographers from the America issue of ZEKE magazine. And this is the second of a 2-part series. And we could easily spend 90 minutes on any one of these photographers, but there are a total of 18 in this issue of ZEKE, and we'd like to give as many as possible an opportunity to present their work to an audience without overwhelming you. So in this session, we have 5. In the previous session, we had 4. But the downside is that we're not going to be able to spend a lot of time. We'll need to limit each photographer to about 12 minutes rather than 90 minutes, which they each deserve. The America issue of ZEKE was conceived to do what we've never done before with ZEKE magazine, which is to bring it home and focus on this country here. And before I say anything else, we call it the America issue, and I want to apologize for our neighbors south of the Canadian border and north of the Mexican border, because actually I got it the other way around, our neighbors north of the Canadian border and south of the Mexican border, who are clearly Americans, but for the purpose of this issue and in the tradition of Robert Frank and his seminal book, The Americans, the term America and Americans has a certain currency out there. So for this issue of ZEKE, we're really looking at the United States. And this issue of ZEKE was conceived and released during a time of great division and upheaval in this country, a time that is, really more divided than it's been in almost 150 years. And SDN photographers have done a terrific job commenting about these issues, and we'll see some of them shortly. If you're not a subscriber to ZEKE magazine, I hope you take this as an opportunity to subscribe. This is the American issue, 64 pages with great large pictures by the photographers, 18 of the photographers. So you can subscribe at zekemagazine.com, and really hope you'll consider doing that. A few other things before we get started. This event is being recorded and will be posted on the SDN YouTube channel within a few days. And the chat is open and will be during the entire presentations. We hope people take an opportunity to use the chat. And if you could just tell us now where you're from. It's always great just to see people chat and letting us know where you're from. We will be taking questions after each presenter, and we won't be doing them through the chat. We'll just ask people to just unmute themselves and speak up. And this event is co-sponsored by Digital Silver Imaging, a digital lab in the Boston area. And Andrea Zaki from DSI is here with us today. I'd like to say a few words. Andrea?
Hi, I'll just keep this brief. I want to say that I was really blown away, Glenn, by this issue of ZEKE. I just got it a couple of days ago, and it's wonderful. I would also encourage everybody to go on the SDN site if they want to see more photographs by these photographers, because it's really great. And I also want to encourage everybody out there to do 2 things. One is to print your images, whether that's with digital silver imaging. We make real silver gelatin prints and pigment prints. Or if you're doing it at home or with another lab, I just encourage everybody out there to print, because a print is so enduring, and it's so important also for documentary and as an archival record, as well as for exhibitions. So please print. And the other thing I want to say is, please support the institutions that support documentarians. So if your camera company or your printer or your photo lab isn't supporting what you do, I don't know why you would support them. So I just want to say that, and also thank you to all the photographers that are here today and participating.
All right, thank you for that, Andrea, and thank you for all your support. So the structure for this program this afternoon is that first I'm going to introduce all the speakers first and show the spread from the print issue of ZEKE magazine. And then we'll start one at a time, and I'll show their galleries, their full galleries from the SDN website, and they'll introduce their work, and then we'll go through the galleries. We probably won't get through everybody's full galleries in the interest of time, but we'll certainly give you a good taste of their work. All right, so I'm going to start sharing my screen now to show the spreads from the print version of ZEKE. So let me find this to share. Okay. All right, so this is the cover of ZEKE. Here with this photo by Amber Bracken at a pipeline protest. And the first speaker will be Boston-based Matilde Simas. She's a visual journalist who has a BA in psychology and women's studies and attended Rhode Island School of Design to study photography. Her images have been published in Trafficking in Persons Report, an annual US State Department publication, and in Kenyan research publications to advance anti-trafficking efforts. With photography exhibited by various United Nations agencies, Matilde founded Capture Humanity, an organization supporting grassroots community initiatives with storytelling and media. And we'll get to see these photographs larger in a minute. Our second speaker will be Brian Branch Price. He began his career as a freelancer for the Washington Post, then staffing with the News Journal in Wilmington, Delaware, and the Associated Press in New Jersey. He focuses on portraiture, reportage, and fine art photography. Brian has worked with Ebony Magazine, GM, and others, and had several art exhibits at the Plainfield Public Library on his Black gospel artists and veterans, which included over 20,000 visitors. He holds degrees in environmental geology and fine arts from Howard University. Cheryl L. Guerrero is a San Francisco-based photographer. Locally, she contributes to online media publications chronicling life in the San Francisco Bay Area. Photography is a way for her to create and explore while documenting life and relaying important stories. Her work revolves around people and the underlying themes of community, culture, and tradition. Raymond W Holman Jr. is a corporate and documentary photographer with over 20 years experience located in Philadelphia. His client list includes the Washington Post, Philadelphia Inquirer, New York Times, Politico, Philadelphia Health Department. And since March 2020, he's been working on a personal project titled COVID-19 in Black America, which we'll be seeing shortly. And this work focuses on how the pandemic has affected Black and Brown communities in Philadelphia, its surrounding areas, and in Atlanta, Georgia. And our last speaker will be Lizzy Unger. She's a photographer, storyteller, communications consultant based in this DC area. She uses photography to document and elevate the work of local activists and everyday people working for change. Okay, so I'm now going to stop sharing this and start sharing the SDN website so I can share these galleries and the photographers can talk about their work. And we'll start with Matilde Simas. So Maddie, if you just want to introduce this project, that would be great.
Sure. So this project is part of a larger project that looks at recovery and reintegration of survivors of human trafficking. This particular project takes place in the state of Maine. But really, by using survivor stories about their trafficking experiences and about recovery is really what this project is really about. It looks at programs and systems that have enabled this particular person. It's a single voice story. The woman's name is Carrie Stewart. These systems that have either enabled her to either thrive or disabled her in both her childhood and even now as she's trying to recover from a trafficking experience. But like I mentioned, this is one part of a much bigger project, a longer term project on human trafficking. I've worked in Uganda, Belize, Kenya, Ethiopia, the Philippines, and in the US here, I've worked in Maine and New York. I decided to work on a trafficking story here in the United States because of the way Americans were responding to my work internationally. Most Americans don't think that trafficking happens in the US, but trafficking is very prevalent here in the US. Both sex trafficking and labor trafficking, even marriage, forced marriage happens here in the US. I mean, and the first goal for a project like this is my longest form story I've ever worked on. I've been working with Carrie Stewart for 4 years. The goal is really to use photography as a tool to help survivors see themselves in a different light, enabling them to take control of their own stories, because the stories that we tell about ourselves really help shape our identity. And I want survivors to identify as being brave and strong, and you know, really see themselves as not as victims, but as, you know, brave survivors. And then secondly, the work acts to educate people, the public, about what trafficking looks like and what it looks like in different places in the world. The hope is to encourage people to talk about trafficking and to engage community and to have community engagement, to start conversations about trafficking. Yeah, and then this particular story, like I mentioned, it's about Carrie Stewart. She was lured into trafficking by someone that we refer to as like a Romeo pimp. He presented himself as a boyfriend and made her promises of having a modeling career. They were supposed to go to New York City, and she ended up in Atlantic City, being forced to sell herself in the commercial sex industry. But it takes a really good look at mental illness in her recovery. Drug addiction is a big part of her story. She was coerced into staying in her situation because she was forced to take drugs and then became an addict, is in and out of recovery programs because of her addiction. And healthy living. She's always striving to be a good mother and live a healthy life. So in a lot of the images, you'll see her with her family and her children, because really all she wants is to have a healthy family, and to have her children, you know, thrive in life. And she's always, you know, she's fighting her addiction. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. I would say the first year that I worked with Carrie, things seemed very normal. You can see in a lot of the images, it's like it's a normal family. After working with her,
is this her? Who are we looking at here? The man on the right.
That is the father of the child that she's holding. His name is Little J. The father's name is Jason. So this is Carrie's family. She has 2 other children, but this is their normal kind of family life. He's picking the child up, I think, to go to daycare in this particular photo. But you can see Carrie, she's smiling. It looks like, you know, a photo that you would take maybe of your own family. And so after 1.5 years of normalcy, I started talking to Carrie about, you know, maybe we should wrap this up. I see that you go to therapy, you're doing other things, and your recovery seems pretty good. She hadn't relapsed, everything was fine. So then I introduced this idea of maybe visiting parts of her past where she was traumatized. In this particular picture, she's standing in front of the house that she grew up in, where she claims is when really in her childhood, things really started going badly. There were a lot of drugs in her neighborhood. Her parents were addicts themselves. Her mother suffered from mental illness, and she really grew up in abject poverty. So growing up, she ended up in foster care. And I would say that was probably the second broken system that she encountered. From foster care, things just got worse for her. She wasn't able to recover from the trauma that she had endured in her childhood. So she was definitely a vulnerable person that a trafficker definitely just sniffed her out and knew that he could exploit her. But it wasn't until working with her close to 3 years that her addiction became what it is. This particular picture that we're looking at now, I showed up at her house. She was still sleeping. She had overslept. She knew I was coming, and I had never encountered her with this kind of weight loss. She was home recovering from relapse, and it was really shocking to me. And then there was the photo of her where she's sitting on the bed, and she really looks out of sorts. You know,
I love that photo. Yeah, this one.
Yes. So I come to her home with the officer that she claims saved her. They hadn't seen each other in 7 years. One of the things that I wanted to do for her was I wanted to reconnect them. She really wanted to see him. And I show up at her house, and she's a full-blown mess. She's been using. I had never seen her that way. It was very scary for me. I have other photos of her where she looks just terrible. With her permission, I'm sharing this particular photo. The other photos I won't show because I don't think it will help her. I think it will just harm her. And one of the things that I strive to do is not cause any harm. I want people to self-reflect even when they're not doing well, but I don't want to make her feel worse. But we do have the opportunity to reconnect her with Tim Ferriss. He's the officer that advocated for her when she was brought into the station, and he's the one who brought to light that she wasn't a prostitute, that she really is a victim of something really horrendous. Here they are, they're hugging for the first time in 7 years. You know, this was a moment that I was so stressed out trying to capture this because I know it was an image that she really wanted. And I was fumbling with my camera. It was really cold outside. She appeared as though maybe she was using this day. So I was really stressed out. But this is a really important image because of who they are to each other. He was really the first person in her life that helped her. I mean, even now he's a part of this photo essay has become a film that I've been working with, and he's a big part of the film. And yeah, this is this is a big photo for me. But in this photo, she's with her child, one of her children, and she says that the most important part of her life is being a mother, striving to be a good mother. And it's mothering that keeps her from using, but also keeps her from falling into depression. She suffers from post-traumatic stress syndrome. She has displaced personality disorder. So Carrie is someone that not only fights addiction, but she has a lot of mental illness, and she's very, very intelligent. She's like super. I don't know anyone who would let me follow them around for 4 years of their life like Carrie has. She's an absolute advocate for people who have had a sex trafficking experience. I mean, she's an amazing person. Here she's at a nonprofit that supplies people that have survived trafficking with clothing. And so at the time, the woman that ran the nonprofit kept the clothing in her basement. And so we're in the woman's basement, and Carrie is trying on shoes. I remember taking this photo, and she's trying to try on shoes. She's holding her newborn baby. And at one point she's handing me her baby. And, you know, it felt really strange for her to already be trusting me to hold her child. And I had my camera in my hand, and I'm trying to work, and I'm trying to observe and take this all in. And I remember telling her, no, you know, no, I can't take your baby. I'm holding my baby. I'm holding my camera, and I'm trying to, you know, just take in her life. The other thing that's unique about this project is the way I had to also guard my own emotions when taking in her story, because to me, her story is so tragic and it can be triggering for me. So most of the story collecting, I either collected through voice messaging, or text messaging. I didn't really start collecting her story in person until I started working with film with Carrie, because it was just too emotional for me. Even talking about her story at times, it's very difficult for me. It's just a really tough story.
Matilde, why don't we see if we have any questions from the audience here about this project. So would anybody like to ask Matilde any questions or comments about this project that we just looked at? Let me pull it up again.
Yeah, I'd love to ask a question if it's,
Yeah.
I don't know how you'd like us to respond to that. Should I raise my hand? I don't see the hand.
No, just do what you're doing.
All right, great. Well, I love this. It's so powerful, and I really appreciate you saying how hard it is for you to deal with it, because I can empathize with that perspective. And I guess I'm really curious. I did a project with a woman who had breast cancer, different scenario, but something that is still affects one's inner core. And she had a double mastectomy. And I had initially gotten involved in the project because I saw it as a means. I was a crisis counselor in one of my past lives and past professions. And I saw it as really a great means for helping her go through the process. And it almost seems like that is also what you are doing. You've used words like, I want her to see where she's empowered. And I'm wondering, how is that termed? I mean, is there a term that you term that? Because I haven't seen anybody else talk about it in that fashion before, if that makes sense.
I'm not sure if there's a term for it. But I think photography has, I also do portrait and wedding photography, and I see it in my own paid clients that photography helps us feel good. Seeing yourself look good and courageous and brave. So there is a lot of positivity in terms of seeing your image projected through someone else's eyes when it comes to trying to be courageous, right? But I don't know if there's a proper term for what I'm trying to do with photography. I'm not sure. The other thing I want to mention is that it's really important for me to also work in a trauma-informed process where I'm allowing Carrie and all the survivors that I work with globally to take charge, not just of their story and how we're telling it, but how they're being photographed. What environments do we want to use? Do they feel safe? And I approach them ongoingly about consent. Of course, the first goal is to help them psychologically, but it is also the images are also in the film is also being used to create community engagement, using their photos in their story to spread awareness. I think with the help of people like Carrie and Sergeant Ferris, things can improve one victim at a time, right? This is a social epidemic, I think, that requires mass recognition and a lot of resources to combat this. And so Carrie needs to be reminded at certain points in our project that this is meant to be shared, and working in that trauma-informed space is really important to give them the agency that they're in control, not me. If that makes sense.
All right, thank you for that, Matilde. We're gonna have to move on now, and thank you for that question, Goya. So let me share Brian Branch Price's project now. Second. Hey, Brian, why don't you introduce us to this project?
Okay. It didn't come on my screen yet.
Oh, I'm getting an error message actually on my computer. I'm sorry. Hold on a second. Yeah, you know how Macs have this spaces thing, which is really interfering with this. One second. Let me try that again. Hopefully you can resolve this.
Glenn, it's not going to be that great film festival that we just saw from Matilde. That was some great stuff there.
Let's see, I'm having a little bit of a problem here. I can share my entire screen. Are people seeing my entire screen?
I'm seeing it.
Yeah, let me see if I go into full screen now.
Yes.
All right, are you seeing your gallery in full screen?
Yes.
Okay,
Go.
yeah, so tell us about this project, Brian.
So the project, I titled American Dance. I was following the footsteps of a mentor of mine, Roland Freeman, who's an extraordinary documentary and street photographer out of Maryland. And years ago, my photo teacher handed me his book, and I was just so taken back of his work. And one of the things that I saw was that he did some work on dance, and he did a club in Eastern Shore of Maryland, and he did something in Jazz Alley in Chicago, and it was 2021. I was trying to figure out what, some work to do. Of course, this is self-assignment. And I reached out to Roland. I said, Roland, I like your work. I said, I just kind of want to retrace the steps I can with your dance. And so, but, I'm not really going to Chicago and Maryland Eastern Shore. So I found some work in New York and Jersey and Detroit. So what I did find was house music. That's the closest I could find for people dancing in the streets or in the clubs. And the theme of the project was how the Black culture has contributed to the American culture with swing. Everyone does the cha-cha slide or the electric slide, or even one of the things that's coming up in the Olympics in 2024 is breakdancing. So there's a lot of contribution that the Black culture has contributed to American dance, and I wanted to dedicate this project to just the dance section. So this was, basically on the street, and so what you're seeing here with the checkered floor. If you can hold it for a second, I was up in Harlem finishing up another project, and I hear this voice shout, "Take me to Harlem!" And I was like, "What's going on here in Harlem where people are dancing and singing in the streets?" I said, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe it." So they were on 122nd and Malcolm X Boulevard, and they were doing swing dance and break dance and just incredible stuff. So I pulled my car over, found a parking spot, and immediately went shooting. It was presented by the Soap Opera Presents, which are artists who are out of work from pandemic. So they're professional dancers, professional singers, and you had a 13-piece orchestra. And then all of a sudden you see folks on this corner, and then the corner drifted into the street, then across the street. So there's a pretty amazing piece right here in Harlem. But but I also, you can keep going, Glenn. So then I found, some dancers in 2021 doing house music, and house music. People from Chicago will say house started in Chicago. People from New York will say, well, hold up, wait a minute. Let's really talk about how house got started. You can go to Coney Island and see it on the boardwalk. But in Newark and Jersey, you mostly find it in the parks. But this particular summer, the streets were shut down, and they offered it up. This particular fella, he's known as a house head, and it's 120 decibels coming out of his speaker, and he's just absorbing the music. I don't know how he's doing it. I couldn't get that close to him too long. So I find it fascinating for house artists and dancers and musicians to pay tribute to dance, because if you're dancing house, you do whatever you want to do. It's not a certain form. It's just wild artists, as you call it. So that was the focus of the story, to find dancing in the streets, and people just pretty much having a good time on a Friday evening. I also went to, you might see some photos here in Detroit. Well, this is still in Newark. people just dancing, they gather around, the DJs come, the music is loud, like I said, 100 to 120 decibels. That's pretty loud. With the average decibels runs around 8 or 10. So this is basically, and I just want to quickly summarize about the project. Of course, it's still ongoing. If you go to a Black church, you'll see they'll dance in church. There's ballet. There's a whole bunch of form dance. You have the Alvin Ailey dancers, and there's so many dance forms that Black Americans have contributed to our country, and that's what I want to show. And so as the summer picks up, as the winter picks up, I'll be doing more images on the dance, and some of this is another house photo, and these folks have been house heads for 20 and 30 years, which is really interesting. I hope we have some house fans out there can chime in on what I'm talking about in the dancing in the streets. And if I could talk about a house, so Chicago has a place called Garage House, and so the dance kind of started there. And then RuPaul has a house where they have fashion and dancing, and they would do it in Studio 54, and each house would do their own presentation. So that's going back and forth with the origins of house. So like I said, Chicago will have their taste, and New York and New Jersey and LA will have their taste of house dance.
Are these organized events, or do people just kind of impromptu?
Well, they have scheduled events throughout the summer when it's warm out, and they just follow along. So you'll find them in cities throughout. If you follow them on Facebook, or I just happened to call someone who knew it. I didn't really had to find a lead, and then I just walked out there, and there they were.
I love the quality of the photographs, like just the graphic black and white quality of them is really powerful.
Oh yeah, thank you, Glenn. And they sit by and just enjoy it. This was youngsters, 22, 23, 24, and they're all during their dance at American Dream at East Rutherford, there by Giant Stadium. I will say this was a funky weekend. So I found these assignments that happened in DC and New York all on the same weekend. So I find myself shooting a job in DC real early, and then I don't have those pictures in there. And then coming up to New York and in Jersey, I guess I felt the youthfulness going on in that day for me. I don't know what happened, but I just wanted to photograph because they're all having on this one day. This particular Juneteenth celebration that you see here.
Yeah, there's no just observers. Everybody's participating. Everybody's dancing.
Yeah, everybody's dancing here. They're doing what they do. And let me come in. I was backstage, behind stage, in between. This is what they do. The youngsters, I call them youngsters, 25 to 30. I don't know what is that, Z generation, the millennials? I don't know what generation that is. And they're just all having a good time, and everything was just peaceful and happy. And if I had anybody from Detroit, you'll notice these are from Detroit. Hearts Plaza, Detroit. I have a special place in my heart for Detroit. I try to love Detroit, and I walk downtown, just doing some street work, and I said, "Oh my goodness, they're dancing in the streets." Like, of course, you're dancing in the street in Detroit. So, and so that's the summary of what's happening here.
Great, wonderful pictures, wonderful energy. Why don't we see if anybody has any questions about these photographs? Anybody want to comment or have questions?
Glenn?
Yeah.
I want to ask Brian, I love these photographs, and the light quality, especially, kind of reminds me of the ones of like old Hollywood, like establishing kind of the look you're creating for your photographs.
Yeah, Andreas, thank you. This one particular here is available. I'm catching it just before the sun goes down. And it's wide open at 1.4 or 1.2. I'm not sure. I have to look at the aperture. I'm not sure. I have to look at. But yeah, most of them are wide open. There's a couple of them. I do have a couple of strobes going on because it was really, really dark. But the ones in Harlem were available. I think I have one in there where there was. Well, actually, all available. They didn't have one pop light in there. So let me do the best I can. They didn't have one pop light in there. So let me do the best I can. And I do
really amazing.
Print, Andreas. And I do print, Andreas.
This photograph, when we published to the SDN Instagram account, actually, I'm getting a very bad echo. Are other people hearing that? I'm getting.
Yeah, let me outlet myself.
I don't know why that happened all of a sudden. Let me just try stop sharing. So I was going to say that picture we're just looking at, we posted to the SDN Instagram account, and it got more likes than any other photograph we've ever posted to Instagram. So thank you for that, Brian. That was really wonderful to have the opportunity to use this photo.
No, thank you for the opportunity to share with SDN. I love your projects and everyone who's involved.
I noticed that some of the images are like a 6:7 format. Are these all shot with a standard like 35mm format, or did you use a 6:7 camera for some of them?
No, some were full frame, some were cropped, and I used 35mm. I think one might be a film, but mostly all digital.
Okay, before we move on, any other comments or questions about this wonderful work? Okay, why don't we move on to Cheryl's work and see if I could get this screen sharing working a little better this time. Okay, Cheryl, why don't you, actually, I need to stop this for a second. It's sometimes I've got a technical glitch with the screen sharing. Here we go. Cheryl, why don't you introduce this project and talk about it? Tell us about the low and slow cruise in the mission.
Yeah, so this project was done, I'm from San Francisco, and this project is based in the Mission District of San Francisco. And the Mission District is historically, it's a Latino district. And over the years, certainly in the last 20 years, there's been a lot of gentrification in that area. And so I had actually originally started going out. I've been in the city forever, but I only started photographing the cruises in 2017. And when you first go out, for me, it was just this beautiful display, the cars, the community, because most people think of lowriding and it's specifically about the cars. And there is, obviously that's the center point. There's such a pride and a creativity and artistry involved in the cars. But when you're down there, there's such a sense of community. And for me, that was really important when you think about the history of the Mission District and the history of lowriding in the Mission District in San Francisco in particular, because lowriding has a long history even within the Bay Area. San Jose is about an hour south of San Francisco, and the people have been cruising there forever. But within San Francisco, it has a long history, and so it's really interesting when you're looking at that, and then you're looking at all of these kind of candy colored cars. All of these, a lot of the cars have designs on them that represent cultural pride. So kind of putting that together, it just became for me really important to document that sense of community, of cultural pride, of culture within a neighborhood that was losing its community. So the Mission District has become very popular in terms of people wanting to live there, in terms of shop turnover and things like that. And a board of supervisors, a San Francisco board of supervisors, just as a note, this particular thing, made in the mission, that's a popular kind of saying. It's on signs like that. It's on T-shirts, made in the mission or raised in the mission, and that's because of this loss of community. So, as I was saying, a board of supervisors study in 2015 showed that between 2005 and 2015, the neighborhood, like I said, is traditionally or historically a Latino neighborhood, lost 8,000 of its Latino residents, um, and that by 2025, the Latino population would be half of what it was in 2000. So there's this kind of this mix of cultural pride, of community. And about a year ago, I started doing street interviews, because you can go down there and you can look at it, you can see, you understand what's going on with the gentrification and the loss of community, but then you hear it firsthand. I think in my synopsis of my abstract of the exhibition, of the project, I quoted a woman named Audrey who said, these cruises are about us us showing that we're still here, we're still present in this community culturally, um, and with pride, even though we can no longer afford to live in the city we were born and raised in. And so um, for me, it's just this beautiful expression of culture and community. And it was particularly important for me to document it in that setting, in that community, in that neighborhood. um,
How many different shooting sessions does this represent, what we're looking at here?
since 2017. Well, there are only a handful of cruises each year, right? So, and they're usually from October to about March, there's nothing, just weather-wise. And so there's maybe 5 cruises a year, and I haven't been able to um, get to all of them over the years. So
And they're organized, people know when the dates are, when the dates are, or?
yeah, absolutely. So that's another big thing. The history of low riding in San Francisco. Um, Back in the 70s, there was kind of like a resurgence, like a renaissance, if you will, of low riding. And at the same time, I'm sure in other parts, but specifically within San Francisco, there was also a corresponding um, crackdown. And so there was this rise in kind of lowering popularity again, but then there was the lowriders in the Mission District were being targeted by law enforcement. So there was a crackdown with um, arrests, ticketing. They would even shut down Mission Street in order to not have the cruises take place. And if you talk to some of the lowriders from, that were cruising during that time period, um, there were arrests and um, excessive force used. And Roberto Hernandez, who is the founder of the Lowrider Council, he, along with some others, actually filed a civil rights lawsuit against this San Francisco Police Department, as well as the mayor at the time, um, Dianne Feinstein. And that went on for, that particular lawsuit was settled after several years. But what it meant, that what they created or what they built from that, was that these cruises, so this is an example of kind of that long game work, which is that this is the opening of the Carnaval parade. Every year we have it at the end of May, and every year the lowriders open the parade. So it's a long, a long parade of cars and lowrider bicycles that open the parade. And that is because the city and the Lowrider Council work together now. And so they do shut down certain parts of Mission Street on certain cruises. And they do traffic direction. The police will come out and do traffic correction, or traffic directing. And so the Lowrider Council, not only do they have this history of having fought back to be able to have the right to do this, to show their pride, to show their culture in this community, but they also give back. The Lowrider Council is known to, participate and so it's not, so the Lowrider Council is kind of an umbrella thing, and then they have the different car clubs, and they come in and they do things like fundraising for schools in the mission. They were part of creating the Mission Food Hub, which was done during the pandemic to help struggling families. They were part of the movement Our Mission No Eviction, because the Mission District, as I was talking about gentrification, since 1997 has had one of the highest rates of Ellis Act evictions and no fault evictions in the entire city, that district.
Where
And
does the term lowriders come from? My understanding is that historically, they would actually lower the rear shocks to make the cars actually lower. Is that correct? Do I have that right?
it is, yeah. So that started probably in the 30s in Los Angeles, and they were so. Chevys are really popular in lowriding culture, and I think the beginnings of that were that Chevys were a little less expensive. So, it started with the Chicano population. So Chicano is Mexican American, and that is really the core of the culture behind lowriding. Although that is, it's by far not in any way restricted to Chicanos anymore. This is worldwide now. There are, lowriding clubs all over the world. Japan is a perfect example. I have a big lowriding subculture, but in Los Angeles, yeah, so Chevys were popular. They initially didn't do anything to the engines because the cars were there to be utilized on a daily basis, but they did have a style, so they would paint them and then lower them. So by cutting the coils or putting like sandbags in the back, over time, that's obviously they've done a lot with the hydraulics, so they do, um, low and slow is kind of the ethos, which is it's not a sideshow. It's not for burnouts and donuts and things like that. This is cruising. This is style. This is yeah. It's about the car. It's about the community. You'll notice in a lot of my photos there are children. This is about family.
Yeah. All right, let's see if we've got any questions about this. Would anybody like to comment or ask a question?
Brian loves that purple. That purple is just, man, I was screaming at that purple. And
Yeah.
I really like the angles that you're hitting. You're coming up with different angles and different perspectives, which is hard to do with cars sometimes. So I really applaud you on the work and the information you got on this history of the Latin folks there in San Francisco.
Thank you. Yeah, it's I'm not a car photographer, so my focus is always people. And so yeah, it's just kind of working. The purple was a serendipitous happening. That's kid. He has lowriders. Um, he has cars, but in San Francisco, he's usually on his bike. He's like, oh, it's just easier to get in and out. Otherwise, you can be, stuck on Mission Street, just cruising with no parking or anything for hours. So he usually comes out with his lowrider bikes, and those are like that's artistry within itself. It's a lot of time, a lot of um, energy, a lot of money can be spent on both the vehicles and the bicycles.
Has the community had an opportunity to see these photographs?
I connect with the community while I'm out there, and so I'm always one of the things that I always do is that I offer up my information once I've taken an image, that if anybody wants to connect with me, that I can provide them copies. Any kind of portrait or something of that nature, I'm always getting. There's a permission that I get. I like to work that way. My lens is a 24-70, so I'm up close. They know I'm there. And then I connected with the president and founder of the Lowrider Council, because I did a piece for King of the Streets. That's an annual car show. It's a lowrider car show, takes place in San Francisco, where they do the bounce contest. That's where they do the hydraulics and and you can see the cars, bouncing, and they measure it. So I took a bunch of photos for that piece, and then I shared them all with him. So yeah, I would love to be able to have the opportunity to share this in a kind of a more set setting, so that the community is able to see it.
I mean, there's such great photos. I'd love to see them in an exhibition somewhere.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
All right, let's move on. And our next presenter will be Raymond Holman. We'll talk about his work with COVID-19 in Black America. So Raymond, why don't you introduce us to this project?
Yeah, so the project started, well, my awareness of COVID-19 started, I guess, in late summer 2019, hearing that there was some sort of pandemic over in China. And I just kind of kept aware of it, moving through the end of 2019, hoping that it wouldn't reach America. And then once it did reach America, hoping that it wouldn't reach the West Coast. But as everyone knows, it went from the West Coast to Middle America, from Philadelphia and New York City. So finally, I really started paying attention to it. It was sort of like scaring the hell out of me, because I had no understanding of what COVID-19 was all about. I did know that it was affecting the assignments I was receiving, because I wasn't receiving any assignments moving towards the March of 2020. So I decided to initially approach it as a photojournalistic assignment. But anyway, this particular image here, her name is Robin Bastion. I was actually talking to her yesterday. She was the first person that I met who had a family caregiver or a family member who passed away from COVID-19. And her sister actually was in a nursing, a pretty high level nursing facility here in Philadelphia. And she died in this nursing facility alone because, as everyone knows, no one was allowed to go into the nursing facilities as this pandemic moved forward. So her sister died alone in a nursing facility, and it had a huge effect on Robin. I actually was talking to her yesterday, but the clothing that she's wearing and the purse that she's wearing belonged to her sister who passed away from COVID-19, I think in around maybe March, April of 2020. And she still hasn't gotten over it at all. And in speaking to her yesterday, one of the things she shared with me was that this portrait session really helped her, release some of the trauma that she experienced in being unable to see her sister in the facility. And she's just been very thankful for being a part of it. In 2019, I had made a conscious decision to do more corporate work using off-camera flash. So I bought these flash systems to do, corporate work, and I was not able to do it because of the pandemic. So I decided to start using the lights to do these portraits. This particular person is actually a college classmate of mine. He, along with his sister and other family members, went to a wedding in 2020. And his twin sister actually passed away from COVID-19 in 2020 also, I think around September of 2020. Again, I'm using, off-camera flash because I want to be able to control the final look of the image with regard to how I position the lights. And I found talking to the individuals that I was doing the portraits of very heartfelt. This is an image I captured when I went down to Atlanta, Georgia in 2021. This man actually lives in Philadelphia. He had purchased a house in Southwest Atlanta. And because of his job in Philadelphia, he was able to work anywhere he wanted to in the world, basically. So he's an example of a individual who the pandemic gave him the opportunity to continue to work, um, but also gave him the opportunity to live in Atlanta, for most of 2020 and into 2021. Again, in this particular image, I used off-camera flash because I wanted to just. I'm really into creating images using off-camera flash now, and I wanted to highlight his facial expression and balance that light with the environment that he was living in at the time.
Well, also, it's powerful portraits. You really do a great job with that.
Thank you. He
Sorry.
It was interesting. I mean, it was just interesting talking to him. And like I said, he was actually the first person that I spoke to who benefited from the pandemic. Of course, he was able to work. He could have moved to Alaska or Australia, and he still would have been able to work every daggone day because he was able to work, through his computer, even though
What
his
kind of
job
work
was.
did he do?
He worked for the city of Philadelphia. I kind of forget his exact position, but even though the office is closed down, he was still able to work. Matter of fact, in Philadelphia right now, so I was talking to someone in the business community about a month ago, only about 60% of the offices in Philadelphia have reopened since 2020. So a lot of people are still not going to work, going into an office. So I don't know. I would assume that he's probably back, in Philadelphia now. This young lady is a registered nurse. I actually was introduced to her by my sister. She had a nursing position or has a nursing position where she would go out to the community to provide medical care to older people or people who weren't able to make it to a doctor's office or to a hospital. And in the process of doing her job, she developed COVID-19, and she became a long hauler. In that, she had effects from COVID-19, and for about 3 months she was not able to work. And I noticed the day that I met her, she was moving pretty slowly, and I thought she was actually moving slowly because she was dressed to go to an event after this portrait session, and she had high heel shoes on. And I thought maybe it was because the shoes she was wearing, but I came to realize later uh, that COVID had still a hold on our health. And she was just moving slowly because she still had whatever that was on her body system was still affecting the way she was able to move around. And again,
And
this is
how
off
long
camera.
after her original case was that?
Um, a couple months. No, 5 months.
Wow.
5 months. And I said she was a registered nurse, so she knew about COVID-19, and she was aware of how to protect herself from developing COVID-19, but it didn't work. She still ended up developing it, and like I said, she's a long hauler. This young man, I forgot how I met him, but maybe through Facebook. He developed COVID-19. And he told me this wild story one day that I wasn't quite sure whether or not to believe it, but later on, in talking to other people, I really believed what he was saying. He developed COVID-19. Went to see his father one day because he has property in New Mexico, I believe it was. And he was feeling tired, so he went to his bedroom, laid down, fell asleep, um, having night sweats, that type of thing. He heard his father knock on his door, and his father asked him if he was okay. He said, "Yeah, I just want to lay down and take a nap for a couple of days." And his father says, "Son, you've been laying in that bed for the past 24 hours." And he couldn't believe it, and he had all sorts of strange dreams. He felt as if he was going to pass away, and um, he battled through the COVID-19. Now I spoke to him maybe I guess 8 months ago now, and he's fine, but he was a person who thought he might not make it. And like I said, he fell asleep. He was asleep for like 24 straight hours. Move on. So this is actually a friend of mine who caught COVID-19. In this particular image, he had was his first time out of his apartment in 15 days. He had got into his car with his daughter who works for a hospital, and his daughter noticed he was sweating a lot. And she decided to take him to the hospital, and he tested positive for COVID-19. They kept him there for 3 days and then released him, and they told him to stay isolated for the next 15 days. So prior to him coming home, his daughter and his grandson cleaned his entire apartment and brought him home. And like I said, this is the first day that he was out of his apartment in like 15 days, and it's taken him. Well, he's recovered now, but he said it really, really wore on his system. This is a woman who is a private healthcare worker. She normally assists people who are disabled, and she was off for a while because she was, dealing with COVID-19, and just being very, very careful, making certain that she didn't also catch COVID-19. This woman, going, you can move forward now. A friend of mine referred me to a family where the husband and the wife developed COVID-19. This lady's name is Kia. Um, both her parents were in the hospital basically at the same time. And the father came home, and then her mother came home. And once her mother got home, she wasn't feeling well again, and they ended up readmitting her to the hospital, and she passed away in the hospital. And the day that I was at the house, I had the intention of doing portraits of both this young lady, Kia, her sister, and the father. And when I walked in the house, I realized her father was still being assisted by air machine. So I just decided just to focus on Kia. Her sister didn't want to be photographed because there was just so much stress going on, and they were preparing for the mother's funeral, and their mother had died maybe 2 weeks prior or 10 days prior. So I decided just to focus on this particular sister. And this is another image where I set up lights. I actually set up two lights, one to the right of the frame, another one was in the background to light the back of the kitchen. And wanted to produce an image that told a story about a particular moment at that house. And I noticed that the woman had a tattoo on her shoulders. I wanted to kind of show that as a message as far as the openness of this particular person, and she's sort of like a healer to some extent, and that's what this particular image is about.
It's such a great picture.
Yeah,
Why
thank you.
don't we see if anybody has any comments or questions about this work? So open it up to the audience. If you'd like to ask a question, just unmute yourself. Anybody?
Yes, Brian again, Glenn. The lighting is great. I have questions. So we're using a tripod. The off camera, was it soft box a little bit, or just a straight flash with softness? But
Yeah, it was off camera flash. I used my camera was not on a tripod. The lights were on a light stand, and I used softbox, a small softbox. I use Westcott lighting, and with all these images, I used a FJ400, which is kind of irrelevant in a way, but I try to, like I say, use the image and the lights to just add a extra dimension to the final image, and I always try to balance, my flash to some extent with the light in the background or somewhere in the image.
You definitely have all the technical things down perfectly in the composition, but you really capture something in each one of these portraits. Like, aside from all the technology, you just
Right,
have
yeah.
a way.
Well, I'm self-taught as a photographer, so it was a hobby that turned into a career. I used to like a lot of available light photography because shooting assignments for newspapers. Most stuff is available light, especially if you're outside, and if you're inside, it was always camera on flash, or camera with flash on top of the camera. But I got kind of tired of shooting available light, and like I said, I made a commitment in 2019 before the pandemic came that I wanted really to learn how to use off-camera flash, because I wanted to expand my ability to create images, and I've always wanted to create images, and I was telling this to a friend of mine yesterday. I've always wanted to create images that when a person saw my image, they would have the experience of like feeling a hand moving through their chest cavity and caressing their own heart. It's always my goal, and I'm able to do that more intentionally now because I'm able to use lights to create images.
Well, photography is all about light. Without
Yeah,
light,
yeah. Light controls photography without a doubt, and I love photography. I mean, I have a tendency when I talk about photography, I haven't done it today, but I always say the photography. So, I mean, I try to honor the gods and goddesses of photography.
all right. Well, that's a good ending note. We'll have to move
Okay.
on here. Thank you
Okay.
for this extraordinary work. Okay, Lizzy, would you like to introduce this project and talk about it a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Glenn, and thank you for having me. It's a huge honor to be included among so many talented photographers, and I love this issue of ZEKE, so it was really an honor to be asked to present today. So this project is about the reproductive rights activists who showed up in front of the Supreme Court. Most of the photos were taken the day that Dobbs versus Jackson, the decision that effectively overturned Roe v. Wade, was officially announced. A few were also taken in May, the day that the decision was leaked. And I was inspired to go out those days because I am like the majority of Americans, am pro-choice and support women's rights. And I was really
kind of feeling sad and angry and a little hopeless at the way that the decision had been made, and knowing that around 60% of Americans support some form of legal abortion, and seeing this right taken away felt really historic. And I knew that, as I said, I was part of the majority, and I really wanted to go out and capture that resistance and the energy of the people who dropped what they were doing to go to the Supreme Court and show their resistance and fight for women's rights. So while I was out there, I was really trying to capture kind of the emotion of the day and of the people who showed up. And it was really somewhat cathartic, because a lot of the emotions I was feeling myself, I really felt mirrored in the protesters who showed up that day. So I tried my best to kind of capture those feelings, and I hope that it kind of serves as a documentation of the people who are resisting this and who showed up, you know, the day it was announced to resist it, and also for other people who might be feeling kind of frustrated and angry and scared as I was, that you're not alone, and that there's a lot of us who feel this way and who will continue to fight for women's rights. So this photo, the protest was organized. There was national groups like Planned Parenthood, as well as local abortion rights groups that had a series of kind of presenters and conversations here. This was like near Union Station, and then we all marched to the Supreme Court. So this is a college student who was sharing the story of how she had to get an abortion, and how it was like such an emotional decision for her, but allowed her to kind of have the life that she has now. And I found her speech especially moving, because you could really feel her emotion, and she had her her friend there who was just kind of standing there against her back the whole time, I think, as emotional support. This is a protester who goes by Peachy, and this was towards like 3 or 4 hours into the protest, as the sun was almost starting to go down, and that the energy of the crowd was starting to kind of break down a little bit. And this protester, Peachy, really energized everyone. She kind of got on a megaphone and led a series of chants that at this point really became basically a scream at the Supreme Court. And everyone was just so emotional, but we were all there together. And so I really kind of appreciate her activism and energy.
In the days following the Dobbs decision, there was a lot of discussion that the Republicans would suffer as a result. And we really weren't sure, but we sure saw it in the midterm elections, where in the end, it was the most important reason why the Republicans didn't do as well as they thought they would be, because the country just didn't support this decision.
Yeah, it's very true. And that's something that I find very heartening. It's just kind of a series of signs.
Were there counter demonstrators there as well?
There was a very small amount of them. There was one guy who had this like electric keyboard set up, and there were maybe 5 counter demonstrators and maybe 700 demonstrators in support. So it was in support of pro-choice. So it was there was a pretty small amount that day. But there was a lot of, one thing that I think was really striking, if you go towards, I think, the second image in this series, there was a lot of police, and there was a huge barrier between where protesters were allowed to congregate and the Supreme Court. There was like the kind of normal crowd control barrier, and then behind that, a second huge barrier. And this, I think, shows the 2 levels of barriers, well, and the huge police presence that I felt really represented, like how removed the Supreme Court has become. Both, you know, it's kind of a physical metaphor for how removed they've become for a lot of the opinions of a majority of Americans.
Are these barriers permanent now, or are they just for the demonstration?
I'm not sure. I think I've been there a few other times, and they have, at least the black one, I think, is permanent. I think the metal ones in front were just for the demonstrations, but it shows that they knew how like unpopular this would be.
Yeah, it sure was. All right, why don't we just open this now to either questions about your work, Lizzy, or just everything that we've seen over the last hour and a half. Just like to invite anybody to unmute themselves and make some comments or ask some questions.
Yeah, I'd like to say something. Great presentations today. It's always good to see new and ongoing work by photographers. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who showed their work, including you, Glenn, who put this whole thing together.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Lizzy, I like this lead photo here that's showing. It's pretty telling.
Thank you.
Thank you to all the photographers, and also thank you, Glenn, for what you do to support us and give us a venue to come together in more ways than one.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you. This work is so important, and I'm just so honored to be able to create these vehicles to show it.
Now, I'd like to say something also about the photographer from San Francisco. All these beautiful images, but I always thought that San Francisco was hilly, all parts of San Francisco. So when I saw your images, I said, Dad, I need to go out to San Francisco and check out the neighborhood, especially this area, because I
Yeah.
find it visually fascinating to me.
Yeah, then maybe that accounts for why it's so popular and why it became a magnet for, people moving in, or it's really kind of the sunny southeast of San Francisco, and it just became a really popular area. I'm kind of on the west side. We get more fog,
Right.
then there's downtown is busier, and the Mission is just a really beautiful area. It has Dolores Park, which is a big green swath, kind of aside from Golden Gate Park, kind of one of the bigger parks in the area. So yeah, and it's a draw. And of course, not all of the people who come to cruise in the Mission are from the Mission. We get people from all over, and yeah, it's a draw.
It's,
No
it's
hills
beautiful.
there.
Yeah, I mean, no hills. I mean, I thought about San Francisco as being hilly,
Yeah.
cloudy, and chilly.
Oh yeah, we have all of that, just
Right.
maybe not right there.
Right. Yeah. Right. But beautiful work.
Thank you so much.
And Brian, I love your work, man. It's beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Likewise, Raymond.
Right.
Absolutely.
Oh, good. I did want to comment on Matilde. She had that huge Cannes Film Festival presentation. I didn't have a chance to comment, but when she's putting on that boot in her bedroom, I was just knocked out. But great work on the details and following her around, and bringing awareness to human trafficking. So
yeah.
Thanks, Brian.
I need a copy of that print there, Matilde.
Okay.
I love the pure documentary nature of this work, Matilde. It's like you're a fly on the wall with the camera, and you just control everything really well. The forms and shapes and tonality, and capture this woman just so wonderfully.
It's really beautiful.
Thanks.
And I appreciate the detail that you put in the captions here too. For documentary, we find that's very helpful and important. Because looking at this picture, I mean, I wouldn't know that she was under the influence of illegal substances. Just looks like a nice picture of her putting on her shoe, but you read the caption and it just brings you so much deeper into really what's going on here.
Yeah, I really like the way that you approach kind of documenting her struggle with addiction. I used to work in harm reduction and addiction support, and it's something that I think is really important to do in a non-stigmatizing, humanizing way. And I think you did a great job with that.
And these pictures are just so wonderful. They're just so positive and bright and vibrant.
Yeah.
This one,
Yeah.
this
That's
one's
beautiful. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks, gang. Yeah, that was a fun shoot.
All right. Anybody from the audience want to say anything or have any questions before we wrap it up? All right. Well, thank you, everybody. This will be our last program for the year. Look forward to additional programming in January. Wish everybody has a happy holiday. Want to thank the presenters today. Really, people want to unmute themselves.
you.
Andreas, do you print from negatives? Andreas, do you print from negatives?
Yeah, we do. We can do
Putting
from
one up
negatives or
tomorrow.
digital files, either one. We can do a scan for you too.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much. Have a
Bye.
great
Send me an
holiday.
email.
Bye.
Next
Thank
week,
you so
everybody.
All right,
much.
thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.